What if the person you trusted most with your life was actually planning to take it? Tonight, we're diving into the darkest corners of healthcare, where healing hands become weapons of terror. 7 true stories of nurses who turned their sacred oath into a license to kill. These aren't just random acts of violence. These are calculated psychological games played by predators who knew exactly how vulnerable their victims were. You'll never look at a hospital the same way again. In 2003, Charles Cullen seemed like any other ICU nurse. Quiet, dedicated, always volunteering for the toughest shifts. But behind his caring facade was America's most prolific serial killer. Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed, helpless, trusting. The machines beep softly around you. Then footsteps approach. A nurse enters with a syringe. You don't question it. Why would you? This person is here to help you heal. But what if they weren't? For 16 years, Charles Cullen moved between hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. At least 29 patients died by his hand, though investigators believe the real number could be over 400. Cullen didn't choose his victims randomly. He studied them, learned their routines, their fears. He would sit by their bedsides, building trust, making them comfortable. Then, when they were at their most vulnerable, he would inject them with fatal doses of insulin or heart medications. The psychological torture was deliberate. He would tell patients they were getting better, just hours before killing them. Imagine the confusion, the terror. One moment you're planning to go home to your family. The next, your heart is stopping and you don't know why. His first victim was 72-year-old Judge John Yengo, a respected man who had spent his life upholding justice, only to die at the hands of someone he trusted completely. But here's what made Cullen truly terrifying. He didn't kill out of rage or greed. He killed because he enjoyed the power, the control over life and death. He once told investigators that he was helping patients by ending their suffering. But the truth was darker. He was feeding an addiction to playing God. Hospital after hospital, red flags were raised. Unusual death rates during his shifts, missing medications, suspicious circumstances. But the system protected him. Background checks were minimal. Complaints were ignored. And Cullen kept moving, kept killing. The scariest part? He looked just like any other nurse. Soft-spoken, professional. The last person you'd suspect of murder. That's what made him so dangerous. Sarah Manning worked the night shift at Riverside General Hospital in Ohio. Night shifts are different. Fewer staff, dimmer lights. Patients are more isolated, more vulnerable. It was the perfect hunting ground for someone like Sarah. Unlike other killer nurses who used drugs, Sarah's weapon was psychological manipulation. She would target elderly patients with dementia or those recovering from surgery who were on heavy pain medications. People whose memories were fuzzy. People who wouldn't be believed if they tried to report her. Her method was chilling in its simplicity. She would enter patients' rooms in the early hours of the morning when they were disoriented and afraid. Then she would begin her psychological torture. She would whisper things like, "Your family doesn't want you anymore. That's why you're here." Or, "The doctors say you're not going to make it. They've given up on you." But it got worse. Much worse. Sarah would move things in patients' rooms. Their water cups. Their call buttons. Making them just out of reach. When patients complained they couldn't reach their water, she would tell them they weren't trying hard enough. When they said their call button was too far away, she would suggest they were imagining things. One 78-year-old woman, Helen Garcia, later described feeling like she was going insane. Sarah would come in every night, telling Helen that her children had said they wished she would just die already, that they were tired of visiting her, that she was a burden. Helen's family noticed she was becoming increasingly depressed and paranoid. She stopped eating, stopped talking. She would flinch whenever a nurse entered her room. Her daughter Maria knew something was wrong, but Helen was too terrified to speak up. Sarah's psychological games weren't just cruel. They were strategic. By breaking down her victims mentally, she was causing real physical harm. Stress hormones, elevated blood pressure, compromised immune systems. She was literally scaring people to death. The investigation only began when Helen Garcia finally found the courage to speak. But by then, Sarah had been playing her twisted games for over 3 years. Dozens of patients had suffered in silence, too afraid or too confused to report what was happening to them. When confronted, Sarah showed no remorse. She told investigators that she was testing patients to see if they really wanted to live, as if psychological torture was some kind of medical treatment. Jennifer Walsh had access to the pharmacy at St. Mary's Medical Center in Florida. As a senior nurse, she had keys to medication cabinets that other staff didn't. She used this trust to orchestrate a campaign of terror that lasted 2 years. Jennifer's game wasn't about killing quickly. It was about prolonged suffering. She would alter patients' medication schedules, giving them the wrong doses at the wrong times. Not enough to kill them immediately, but enough to cause severe discomfort and confusion. Picture being in excruciating pain after surgery, begging for relief, and your nurse telling you it's not time for your pain medication yet, but she had already given you your dose hours early, ensuring you would suffer through the prescribed window. Or imagine having diabetes and, depending on your insulin schedule, Jennifer would delay insulin injections, letting patients' blood sugar spike to dangerous levels. They would experience nausea, confusion, and intense thirst. When they begged for help, she would calmly explain that it wasn't time yet. Her most disturbing case involved Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old construction worker recovering from a back injury. Marcus was scheduled for discharge in 2 days. He was excited to go home to his wife and young daughter. Jennifer had other plans. She began giving Marcus muscle relaxants instead of his prescribed antibiotics. Within hours, he was experiencing severe muscle weakness and breathing difficulties. When Marcus complained he felt strange, Jennifer told him it was normal after back surgery. But she wasn't done. She also replaced his pain medication with blood thinners. Marcus began experiencing internal bleeding. His condition deteriorated rapidly. What should have been a simple recovery became a life-threatening emergency. The psychological aspect was the most terrifying part. Jennifer would sit by Marcus's bedside as his condition worsened, holding his hand and telling him everything would be okay. She was comforting him while simultaneously poisoning him. Marcus survived, but barely. The investigation revealed that Jennifer had been systematically altering medications for dozens of patients. Some experienced weeks of unnecessary pain. Others developed complications that required additional surgeries. When caught, Jennifer claimed she was correcting doctors' prescriptions because she knew better than they did. She showed investigators detailed notes she had kept on each patient's reactions to her medication changes. She had been conducting human experiments. Michelle Torres owned the night shift at Valley Regional Hospital in California. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., she was often the only nurse on an entire floor, 36 beds, 36 vulnerable patients, and Michelle had complete control over all of them. Her method was simple but terrifying. She would create medical emergencies where none existed, then position herself as the hero who tried to save the day. But her rescues were carefully calculated to fail. Michelle would inject air into IV lines, causing potentially fatal air embolisms. Then she would rush to get help, playing the concerned nurse who discovered the emergency. Sometimes she would even perform CPR, knowing it was too late to save the patient she had just murdered. The psychological profile of her victims was specific. Michelle targeted patients who were alone. No family visitors. No one to advocate for them. People who had been forgotten by the world outside the hospital walls. Robert Chen was 89 years old and recovering from pneumonia. His only daughter lived across the country and couldn't visit often. Michelle saw him as the perfect victim. She began by disconnecting his oxygen supply during the night, then reconnecting it just before her shift ended. Robert would wake up gasping, terrified, but by morning his oxygen levels appeared normal. When he complained to the day shift about breathing problems, they assumed it was related to his pneumonia. This went on for weeks. Michelle was slowly suffocating Robert, then bringing him back from the brink. She was playing with his life like a cat with a mouse. But the psychological torture was just as brutal. She would tell Robert that his daughter hadn't called to check on him, that no one cared whether he lived or died. She would read him fake reports saying his condition was much worse than doctors were telling him. Robert became increasingly paranoid and depressed. He stopped eating, stopped participating in physical therapy. Michelle's psychological manipulation was killing him as surely as her physical attacks. The pattern only became clear when a security camera was installed after reports of missing medical supplies. The footage showed Michelle entering Robert's room multiple times each night, always carrying syringes or medical equipment. When investigators reviewed the footage, they watched in horror as Michelle calmly injected air into Robert's the line, then sat in a chair across from his bed, watching as he struggled to breathe. Robert survived Michelle's attacks, but he was never the same. The psychological trauma left him afraid of hospitals, afraid of nurses, afraid to sleep alone. Michelle hadn't just tried to kill his body, she had murdered his peace of mind. At Denver General Hospital, Lisa Patterson was known for her bedside manner. Families praised her for the extra time she spent with patients, the way she held their hands during difficult procedures, how she always seemed to be there during the hardest moments. What they didn't know was that Lisa was creating those hard moments. Lisa had perfected a horrifying routine. She would deliberately cause patients to experience medical crises, then position herself as their emotional support during the trauma. She fed off their fear and their gratitude in equal measure. Her weapon of choice was potassium chloride, a medication that can stop the heart if given in large doses. But Lisa was more sophisticated than other killer nurses. She wouldn't give fatal doses. Instead, she would give just enough to cause severe chest pain and irregular heartbeats. Patients would experience what felt like heart attacks. They would be rushed to the cardiac unit, undergo extensive testing, and endure hours of uncertainty about their condition. Through it all, Lisa would be there, offering comfort and reassurance. Margaret Williams, a 67-year-old grandmother, was Lisa's longest-running victim. Over the course of 6 months, Margaret experienced 17 cardiac episodes. Each time, Lisa was conveniently nearby to help. Lisa would hold Margaret's hand during the chest pain, whispering reassuring words while secretly knowing she had caused the agony. She would comfort Margaret's family in the waiting room, telling them how brave their mother was, how she was fighting so hard to live. The psychological manipulation extended beyond the patient. Lisa was torturing entire families, making them believe their loved one was dying when she was actually being slowly murdered. Margaret's daughter Susan began to notice patterns. Her mother only had these episodes during Lisa's shifts. When Susan mentioned this to other nurses, they dismissed her concerns. Lisa was their star employee. She couldn't possibly be causing harm, but Susan kept detailed records. Times, dates, which nurse was on duty. The pattern became undeniable. Every single cardiac episode occurred within 2 hours of Lisa starting her shift. The investigation revealed Lisa's true nature. She had kept detailed journals describing each patient's reaction to her attacks. She wrote about their fear, their pain, their desperation. But she also wrote about their gratitude when she comforted them afterward. Lisa wasn't just addicted to causing harm. She was addicted to being needed, to being seen as the hero. She was playing both the villain and the savior in her own twisted medical drama. When confronted with the evidence, Lisa's mask finally slipped. She told investigators that she was giving patients meaningful experiences, that she was helping them appreciate life by showing them how close they could come to losing it. Grace Montana worked at Chicago Memorial Hospital's intensive care unit. The ICU is where the most vulnerable patients fight for their lives, where families say goodbye to their loved ones, where hope and despair exist side by side every single day. Grace understood this vulnerability better than most, and she exploited it in the most calculated way possible. Grace's victims were always patients on ventilators, people who couldn't speak, couldn't call for help, couldn't defend themselves. They were completely at her mercy, and she knew it. Her method was psychological warfare taken to its most extreme level. Grace would adjust ventilator settings to make breathing more difficult, but not enough to trigger alarms. Patients would experience air hunger, the terrifying sensation of suffocating while being unable to do anything about it. But the physical torture was just the beginning. Grace would lean close to her victims and whisper detailed descriptions of how they were going to die. She would tell them their families had given up hope, that the doctors were planning to turn off their machines, that no one would miss them when they were gone. James Morrison, a 45-year-old teacher, had been in a car accident. He was conscious, but unable to speak due to the ventilator. For 3 weeks, Grace made his life a living nightmare. She would adjust his ventilator to make him feel like he was drowning. Then she would lean over his bed and whisper, "Your wife has already started dating someone else. She told me she hopes you don't wake up because she doesn't want to take care of an invalid." James couldn't respond, couldn't defend himself, couldn't even close his eyes to shut out her voice. He was trapped in his own body, while Grace systematically destroyed his will to live. Grace would also manipulate James's family visits. She would tell his wife that he had been agitated when she wasn't there, implying that her visits were causing him stress. She convinced his children that their father couldn't hear them, that talking to him was pointless. Slowly, Grace was isolating James from everyone who loved him. She was ensuring that his final days would be filled with loneliness and despair. The pattern continued for months with different patients. Grace had turned the ICU into her personal torture chamber. She was playing God with people's minds and bodies, deciding who deserved comfort and who deserved torment. The investigation began when James Morrison finally recovered enough to speak. The first thing he did was describe the nurse who had whispered horrible things to him. His descriptions were so specific, so detailed, that there was no question about who he was describing. When other former ICU patients were interviewed, similar stories emerged. Grace had been systematically terrorizing helpless patients for over 2 years. During her arrest, Grace showed no emotion. When asked why she had tortured vulnerable patients, she simply said, they needed to know the truth about their situations. False hope is cruel. At Mercy General Hospital in Texas, Dr. Amanda Cross wasn't technically a nurse, but she had nursing duties in the psychiatric ward. This was her domain. Patients with mental health issues, people society had already marginalized and dismissed. Amanda saw these patients as perfect victims. Who would believe someone with schizophrenia or severe depression if they claimed medical staff were harming them? Her method was the most psychologically sophisticated of all. Amanda would use patients' existing mental health conditions against them, making them question their own reality while she systematically destroyed their minds. She would tell patients that their hallucinations were real. If someone with schizophrenia was hearing voices, Amanda would confirm that yes, the voices were real, and yes, they were telling the patient terrible things about their future. Michael Santos, a 28-year-old with bipolar disorder, was one of Amanda's long-term victims. During his depressive episodes, Amanda would visit his room and reinforce every negative thought he was having. "You're right," she would tell him. "Your family would be better off without you. You're just a burden to everyone who loves you. The world would be a better place if you weren't in it." But during Michael's manic episodes, Amanda would fuel his delusions of grandeur, then arrange for him to face humiliating failures that would send him crashing back into depression. She would tell him he was specially chosen for important missions, then ensure those missions would fail spectacularly. She would promise him that famous people wanted to meet him, then arrange for him to be escorted out of public places as a security threat. Amanda was creating cycles of hope and despair that were destroying Michael's ability to distinguish between reality and delusion. Her most disturbing technique involved medication manipulation. Amanda would give patients their antipsychotic medications irregularly, causing them to experience breakthrough symptoms just when they thought they were getting better. She would then use these symptoms to convince other staff that certain patients were becoming more dangerous, more unstable. She was orchestrating their treatment to ensure they would never recover. The psychological portrait that emerged was of someone who saw vulnerable minds as her personal laboratory. Amanda was conducting experiments in human suffering, using the most defenseless people in society as her test subjects. She kept detailed notes on each patient's psychological breakdown. She tracked their responses to different types of manipulation. She was building a handbook for psychological torture. The investigation began when Michael Santos attempted suicide during what should have been a period of stability. When his family demanded to know why he had relapsed so severely, inconsistencies in his treatment began to emerge. Security footage showed Amanda visiting patients far more frequently than her duties required. Audio recordings from patient rooms captured her voice, whispering cruel encouragements during patients' worst moments. When confronted, Amanda's defense was the most chilling of all. She claimed she was toughening up psychiatric patients by exposing them to harsh realities. She believed she was preparing them for a world that wouldn't coddle their mental illness. In her mind, psychological torture was therapy. 7 nurses, 7 different methods, but all of them understood one terrible truth. When you're sick, when you're vulnerable, when you're lying in a hospital bed, you have no choice but to trust the people caring for you. These predators weaponized that trust. They turned healing into horror, care into terror, medicine into murder. The next time you're in a hospital, the next time a nurse approaches your bed with a syringe or sits down to check on you, remember these stories. Remember that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears scrubs and speaks in soft, reassuring voices. Sometimes the person you trust most with your life is the one planning to take it. And the scariest part? There are more of them out there, working night shifts, accessing medication cabinets, sitting by bedsides in ICUs across the country. They're waiting for their next victim. They're waiting for someone just like you. Sweet dreams. If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video, it tells the algorithm you survived. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave, or someone who thinks they are. Comment below. We want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.